Good morning. I'm so glad to have you all gathered together for this children's message today. Yes, I have a visual aid for us, and that'll come clear to you here in just a moment. But in a minute, we're going to hear a story from the Bible that speaks of two very important people. It's a story about these characters that are so important to the story of God's people throughout all of time. And so today is about them and what they came to believe and what they came to trust in. I'm talking about Sarah and Abraham. And as we hear this story in a little bit, this is just one part of the story, but I want to recount a little bit about Sarah and Abraham's story that brought us to this point. We know that in Sarah and Abraham's story that they used to live somewhere else. They were very happy. They had lots of family around them, and they were well cared for. But God had a vision for the world that involved Abraham and his family picking up and moving to another place. Because God wanted to set into motion a new way of God's people living and being together. And so God asked Abraham to pick up and leave and to take his wife and just a little bit of his family. He had no children yet with Sarah, and they had to go and move. And Abraham said yes. He followed God's command, and he moved. And then the story goes on that God promised to Abraham that he and Sarah would have a child. Now, this is pretty exciting news when you're a young married couple, to learn that you're going to be able to become parents and bring a child into the world, and how exciting that is. But Abraham and Sarah weren't a young couple, right? They were older. And in fact, the years went by and no baby came. And the likelihood that a baby would come went on and on and on. And yet God had promised that they would have a child. And not only that they would have a child, but they'd have as many descendants, and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and on and on and on, as there were stars in the sky. But the years went on and no baby. And then finally, God reiterated God's promise one more time. And sure enough, a baby was born. And their child was named, you guys know his name. His name was what? Isaac. That's right, Isaac. And Isaac means, it's a Hebrew form of the word that means laughter. Laughter. And the reason Sarah and Abraham named their child Isaac was because it was so absurd that this old couple would possibly ever experience the joy of having a child of their own. And they laughed and laughed. Sarah in particular laughed and laughed at this wonderful, wonderful news. Well, they had Isaac, and God then continues to work in and through Sarah and Abraham. And then we get a tough story today that we're going to hear in just a minute. But after that thing that happens, as God sort of tests Abraham and sees how much Abraham continues to trust in God's promises, that God would continue to work through them and through their descendants, through Isaac and all those who would come afterwards, that God could continue to work with them. God wanted to test, is what the story says today. God tested Abraham to see if Abraham still trusted. And Abraham did. And Abraham obeyed God's curious command. And at the conclusion of that, this is what it says. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this. You have not withheld your son, your only son. I will indeed bless you, and I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sand that is on the seashore. As numerous that Abraham and Sarah would have so many children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and on, that the number of those descendants, those children, would number as many as grains of sand on the seashore. How many is that? Anybody want to hazard a guess? It's an impossibly large figure. In fact, I think that part of the way the story is told is to just blow us out of the water, right? How much is that? Yesterday, outside in our parking lot, was a collapsed tent. It had fallen in because of the heavy, sharp winds that came through here on Wednesday night, or Thursday night. And unfortunately, we had to take the tent down. So a small group of guys gathered together in the afternoon, and the first task was to move all the sandbags that were used to hold the tent down. Now, those sandbags did their job this time around, but the wind was just too strong for the poles that held up the tent. So we had to pick up and move those sandbags. I was wondering how many grains of sand are in a bag of sand like that one in front of us today. Anybody want to say, do you think there are more than 10 grains of sand? Yeah, right, let's see, let's do this. Raise your hand if you think there are more than 10 grains of sand in this bag. Now take your hand down if you think if there's 100 grains of sand, keep your hands up until I get to a number that you think of. There's 100 grains of sand. How about 1,000 grains of sand? Yeah. Oh, no, we're getting wavering here. Okay. How about 1,000,000 grains of sand? Yeah. How about 1,000,000,000 grains of sand? Congratulations, there are a handful of you who think that there are 1,000,000,000 grains of sand, because there probably are. Now, I didn't count them myself, but I did a little research, and I learned that in a linear foot, you can line up about 10,000 grains of sand. And if you take 10,000 grains of sand in one direction, and then you lay out 10,000 grains of sand in the other direction, and you fill in that square foot, you end up with 1,000,000 grains of sand. And that's just one layer of grain. Now, take your layer up a foot, so you have 10,000 layers, and you get to 1,000,000,000. Well, by my calculations, that bag of sand is about 1 cubic foot of sand right there. And it weighs 60 pounds, but there are 1,000,000,000 grains of sand in that bag of sand right there. So if we moved 40 bags of sand yesterday, how many billions of sand did we move? 40 billion. Congratulations to those who were present today for helping to move 40 billion grains of sand. I think they deserve a round of applause. Absolutely. This is the breadth of God's promise for us on this day. And so when we think about the story of Sarah and Abraham, and we think about all the things that God promised them, land and people and descendants and blessings that are overflowing, think about how many grains of sand are not only just in the bags that we use to hold down that tent, but also the sand that is across a whole big, wide beach along the ocean. My gosh, God's blessings pour and pour into us. So this day, this is what we give thanks for, that God is so faithful to us that we can trust in God's promises to pour out blessings, as many as there are grains of sand, into our lives. Thank you for listening to my story today.